Title: The Perfect Plan. How She Ended Her Cheating Husband. Chapter 1. The Discovery. The day started like any other. It was a quiet Saturday afternoon, and the house was bathed in the warm, golden glow of early autumn sunlight. Emma moved around the living room, methodically folding laundry. She enjoyed the peaceful rhythm of domestic life, organizing clothes, tidying up the house, and feeling the hum of normalcy. The gentle whir of the washing machine and the faint creaking of the floorboards as Jake worked in his office upstairs were comforting background noises. As she worked, her thoughts drifted. What should she cook for dinner tonight? Something comforting. Jake had mentioned having a tough week at work. Maybe a pot roast, slow-cooked with vegetables and herbs. She was already planning the grocery list when the subtle vibration of Jake's phone on the coffee table broke her focus. The device buzzed again, lighting up briefly. Emma wouldn't have thought twice about it under normal circumstances. Jake received texts all the time, and he was often too busy to respond right away. But this time was different. Her eyes flitted over the glowing screen, and the words that flashed caught her off guard. "Last night was amazing. Can't wait to see you again." Her body froze. For a second, she thought she'd misread it. It couldn't be real. Time seemed to slow as her pulse quickened, each thudding beat vibrating in her chest. Her hands grew clammy, and the pile of laundry she was folding slipped from her lap and tumbled to the floor. Emma stared at the phone. Her fingers hovered over it, trembling, as if just touching it would confirm her worst fears. She hesitated, her mind racing through 1,000 possibilities. Maybe it was a misunderstanding, a mistake. But deep down, she already knew the truth. Her heart pounded louder in her ears. Slowly, as if in a trance, she reached for the phone, her fingers cool against its sleek surface. She unlocked it without hesitation, the passcode as familiar as her own. What she saw next shattered whatever fragile hope she clung to. There were more messages. From other women. The text threads were there in plain view, each one telling a story of deceit. Some were recent, but others stretched back months. There were names she didn't recognize, flirtatious messages filled with promises of secret rendezvous, photos, and words that made her stomach churn. Her breath became shallow, coming in ragged gasps as she scrolled further. One woman spoke about an intimate weekend they'd spent together. Another mentioned a dinner they had shared just a few days ago. All of it detailed, graphic, undeniable. Emma's world began to tilt, her vision narrowing into a tunnel of disbelief and nausea. How had she missed it? How had she not noticed the lies, the excuses, the late nights that Jake claimed were work emergencies? Her mind replayed the moments she had brushed off as nothing, when Jake had been oddly distant, or when he had come home smelling faintly of perfume that wasn't hers. She had trusted him. She had believed in their marriage, their life together, their shared promises. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes, stinging, threatening to spill over. But Emma refused to cry. Not yet. The rage and betrayal welled up inside her, but she swallowed it down. She wanted to scream, to throw the phone across the room, to march upstairs and demand answers. But instead, a chilling calmness settled over her, freezing the anger that simmered beneath the surface. This wasn't going to be how she reacted. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing her break down. No, that was too easy. Emma's mind shifted, sharpened, and began to work with an eerie clarity. The pieces of her crumbling life were still fresh, but already, she was thinking about how to turn them into something new, something powerful. She had the evidence in her hands, but it wasn't enough to simply confront him. That would be too quick, too simple. He had hurt her deeply, but Emma was going to hurt him more. She had always prided herself on being patient, on seeing things through to the end. That patience was now her weapon. She could feel the gears turning in her mind, formulating a plan. Jake wouldn't just lose her. He would lose everything. Her eyes narrowed as she scrolled through the messages again, this time with a different perspective. She wasn't just looking at her husband's infidelities. She was gathering ammunition. Each woman, each encounter, was another nail in the coffin of Jake's life. And Emma was going to be the one to hammer them in, one by one. With a slow, deliberate movement, Emma put the phone back on the coffee table, exactly where she had found it. She straightened her shoulders, her face now set in an expression of icy determination. She wasn't going to scream. She wasn't going to cry. She was going to destroy him. Upstairs, Jake remained blissfully unaware of the storm brewing below. Emma could hear the faint tapping of his fingers on the keyboard, the click of the mouse as he worked on whatever project he claimed was keeping him busy. He had no idea that the life he had been so recklessly living was about to come crashing down. Emma sat back down on the couch, staring out the window at the peaceful suburban street. The sun was still shining, the leaves still rustling in the breeze. To the outside world, nothing had changed. But inside her, everything had shifted. She no longer felt like the same woman she had been just minutes ago. Now, she was someone else entirely. She picked up the laundry basket from the floor and began folding the clothes again, her movements mechanical, her mind already mapping out the perfect plan. It was just the beginning, and when she was done, Jake would regret every single lie he had ever told her. As the sunlight faded and the house grew quiet once more, Emma smiled softly to herself. Her revenge would be slow, calculated, and complete. Chapter 2. The Calm Before the Storm. In the weeks that followed her discovery, Emma slipped into a role she knew all too well, the perfect wife. But this time, her flawless facade wasn't out of love or duty. It was part of a plan. She didn't confront Jake about his infidelities. There was no dramatic showdown, no screaming match. Instead, she greeted him with a warm smile each evening when he came home late, as if nothing had changed. She cooked his favorite dinners, initiated date nights, and even laughed at his jokes as if they still touched her. Every gesture was calculated. Her every move was a layer of deception, meticulously crafted to keep Jake in the dark. Behind her composed exterior, Emma was waging a quiet war. Each night, after Jake drifted off to sleep, unaware of the brewing storm, Emma would sit at her desk with her laptop, the glow from the screen illuminating the icy determination in her eyes. She had started a spreadsheet, rows and columns filled with meticulous details. It tracked everything: his late nights, the texts he received, his so-called work trips. She downloaded every incriminating message from his phone, cataloging them one by one. Each entry was a piece of evidence, carefully stored away for the right moment. Emma's patience was her weapon. She didn't need to rush. She wanted everything to be perfect when she finally struck. But gathering evidence wasn't enough. She knew that Jake was too arrogant to realize what was happening right under his nose. He truly believed he had gotten away with it. He still played the part of the doting husband when it suited him, giving Emma kisses on the cheek in passing, even bringing her flowers once. She almost laughed at the audacity of it all. He had no idea she knew about the other women, or how carelessly he had risked their marriage for fleeting affairs. And that was exactly what Emma wanted, for him to remain clueless. To ensure her plan was flawless, Emma hired a private investigator, a man named Lucas, discreet, professional, and ruthless in his methods. He provided her with photos, phone records, and even more messages that she hadn't been able to access. There were hotel receipts, screenshots of text exchanges, and surveillance footage of Jake meeting one of his mistresses at a downtown cafe. The evidence piled up, and with every new piece, Emma felt a sense of grim satisfaction. While Jake was busy enjoying his secret life, Emma was creating hers. She started attending company events, parties, and gatherings she had previously skipped, letting Jake shine in the spotlight alone. But now, she had a new purpose. Emma made an effort to charm Jake's colleagues and their spouses, forging connections that Jake never expected. She smiled and laughed, effortlessly blending into the social fabric of his professional life. Her presence was light and genuine, or so it seemed. At one particular event, she strategically positioned herself next to Jake's boss's wife, a woman known for her gossiping tendencies. They chatted about harmless things: fashion, travel, the struggles of balancing work and marriage. Then, at just the right moment, Emma lowered her voice and casually mentioned, "Jake's been staying late at work a lot lately. It's starting to worry me. He's so distracted. I'm concerned something might be going on." The words were delivered with a perfect mix of concern and innocence, just vague enough not to seem like an accusation but pointed enough to plant a seed of doubt. Emma watched as the boss's wife's expression shifted, curiosity flickering in her eyes. She didn't say much in response, but Emma knew the words would fester, spreading like wildfire through the office grapevine. The slow dismantling of Jake's reputation had begun. Emma became an expert at subtle manipulation, planting quiet doubts about Jake's behavior in the minds of those closest to him. She dropped little hints in casual conversations with his colleagues' spouses, mentioning how Jake seemed more preoccupied lately or how he often forgot things he used to care about. Her words were never overtly accusatory, but hinted that perhaps something wasn't quite right. Meanwhile, Jake remained oblivious, lulled into a false sense of security by Emma's seemingly unchanged demeanor. He continued his dalliances, slipping into the same careless patterns. His arrogance blinded him to the slow, calculated destruction Emma was orchestrating behind the scenes. Emma played her part flawlessly. She continued cooking his favorite meals, planning romantic evenings, and even surprising him with small gifts. The normalcy of it all was disarming, and Jake never suspected that his wife had turned into a master manipulator. On some nights, after they shared a quiet dinner, Emma would look at Jake across the table, her smile soft and loving. But behind her eyes, there was something darker, a quiet satisfaction in knowing that his world was crumbling, even if he couldn't see it yet. In public, Emma and Jake appeared stronger than ever. They held hands at events, exchanged loving glances, and seemed like the perfect couple. But behind closed doors, Emma's calm exterior was merely the calm before the storm. She was gathering her strength, her ammunition, waiting for the perfect moment to unleash everything she had built up. And when that moment came, Jake wouldn't just lose his wife. He would lose his career, his reputation, and his carefully curated life. Emma had all the pieces in place. Now, all she had to do was wait for the perfect time to strike. Until then, she played her role perfectly, biding her time with the cold, patient calm of a woman determined to watch it all burn. Chapter 3. Setting the Trap. Months passed, and slowly but surely, Jake's life began to fray at the edges. Friends who once eagerly joined him for drinks after work started distancing themselves. His boss, once full of praise, now scrutinized every task Jake completed, as if looking for faults. Conversations with his closest confidants became clipped, the camaraderie fading. Jake chalked it all up to stress at work or bad luck, never once suspecting that the woman who shared his bed each night was the architect of his unraveling. Emma, meanwhile, was preparing for the grand finale, her piece de resistance. Every piece was in place, and now it was time for the last and most devastating blow. The perfect opportunity came in the form of a company dinner. Jake had been tasked with hosting his colleagues and higher-ups at their home. It was the kind of event Jake prided himself on, a chance to show off his seemingly perfect life, his beautiful wife, his charming personality. Emma knew it would be the perfect stage for his downfall. She spent weeks planning every detail of the evening. The menu, the decor, the seating arrangements, nothing was left to chance. Jake thought she was going above and beyond to impress his colleagues, but Emma's true intentions were far darker. She ensured that hidden cameras were installed throughout the house, strategically placed to capture every moment of the night. Finally, the night arrived. The house was impeccably prepared, bathed in soft candlelight. Emma dressed in a sleek black dress, her appearance exuding elegance and poise. She looked every bit the doting wife, the supportive partner that Jake believed her to be. As guests began to arrive, she greeted them with warm smiles, effortlessly engaging in small talk and making sure everyone felt comfortable. Jake, riding high on the attention and admiration from his colleagues, was in his element. He laughed and joked, shaking hands with his boss and making toasts with his coworkers, completely unaware of the ticking time bomb just under the surface. Emma moved through the crowd with ease, charming those around her while silently tracking every detail. Beneath her calm exterior, her heart pounded with anticipation. Everything was ready. The trap was set, and now all that was left was to spring it. As the dinner reached its peak, Emma quietly excused herself from the dining room, slipping upstairs to a quiet room she had prepared earlier. There, her laptop sat open, displaying live footage from the hidden cameras placed throughout the house. The cameras captured every angle of the dinner party below, from Jake's confident smiles to the conversations of the guests around the table. Emma's hands trembled slightly as she watched, her pulse quickening. The moment she had been planning for months was finally at hand. Downstairs, Jake's phone buzzed in his pocket. He glanced at it, his smile faltering for the briefest of moments as he read the message. Emma saw the slight shift in his demeanor from the live feed, recognizing that flicker of panic in his eyes. She knew exactly what had happened. His mistress had arrived, just as Emma had orchestrated. The other woman had been completely unaware of the trap she was walking into. Emma had made sure of it. She'd sent her an invitation from Jake's email account, ensuring she would believe she was expected. Now, as the woman stepped into the house, her face flushed with confusion, she realized too late what was happening. Her eyes widened as she took in the scene. Jake, surrounded by his colleagues and bosses, all of them oblivious to the real nature of her presence. The tension in the air became palpable as Jake rose from the table, trying to mask the panic that was beginning to ripple across his face. He excused himself with a forced smile, moving toward the entrance where his mistress stood, frozen in shock. Emma watched it all unfold on her laptop screen, her lips curling into a small, satisfied smile. Everything was going according to plan. As Jake reached the front door, his body language stiff with nerves, Emma descended the stairs gracefully, her expression calm and composed. The mistress, now fully understanding the gravity of the situation, attempted to backtrack, but it was too late. Jake's colleagues had started to notice, murmuring amongst themselves, their eyes flicking between the couple at the door and the woman standing in the hallway. Emma stepped forward, her voice warm and unbothered, though each word dripped with cold intent. "Oh, Jake, I didn't realize you were expecting additional company tonight." She turned to the mistress, her smile still in place. "You must be one of Jake's work associates? You're just in time for dessert." Jake's face blanched as his colleagues exchanged confused, questioning glances. His boss, seated at the head of the table, leaned forward slightly, sensing that something was very wrong. The room was silent as Emma walked over to Jake, her hand resting gently on his arm, the perfect image of a loving wife, while her other hand subtly gestured toward the table where Jake's phone lay. With deliberate calm, she lifted it and opened the Messages app. "You know, I always believed honesty was the foundation of a good marriage," she began, her voice smooth and unwavering. "But I suppose I was wrong." With a quick swipe, she opened the text thread from Jake's mistress and read the most recent message aloud. "Last night was amazing. Can't wait to see you again. Red Heart." The room erupted into murmurs of disbelief as the reality of the situation settled over Jake's colleagues. His boss's face darkened, understanding dawning on him as Emma continued, still in control of the moment. "It seems there's been a misunderstanding," she said, looking directly at the woman standing by the door, her face flushed with embarrassment. "But don't worry, Jake's been distracted lately. It happens." The final blow landed as Emma handed Jake's phone to his boss, showing him not only the message but the entire conversation thread. "Perhaps this will help clarify things," she said, her tone still deceptively polite, though her eyes glittered with victory. Jake stood frozen, his world crumbling around him in real time. Everything he had worked so hard to hide was now exposed, not only to his wife, but to his entire professional circle. The carefully curated image he had maintained for years was shattered in an instant, and there was no way to repair it. Emma, satisfied with the chaos she had unleashed, stepped back, watching as Jake's downfall unfolded. This was the moment she had waited for, the moment when he realized that she had never been the clueless, loving wife he believed her to be. She had been the architect of his destruction all along. And now, as the pieces of his life came crashing down, there was nothing Jake could do to stop it. Chapter 4. The Unveiling. Emma descended the stairs with poised elegance, each step deliberate, her heart pounding in anticipation. She had spent months preparing for this moment, and now, the final act was about to begin. In the dining room below, the air was thick with confusion and unease. Jake stood near the entrance, a forced smile plastered on his face as his colleagues exchanged puzzled glances, their whispers just barely audible. Jake's eyes met Emma's as she entered the room, his expression one of thinly veiled panic. He was sweating, trying to maintain control, but the cracks in his facade were already showing. Emma walked toward him with slow, deliberate strides, her black dress clinging to her figure like armor. In her hand, she held a thick folder, the weight of it a tangible reminder of months of lies and betrayal. Jake's pleading eyes searched her face for a clue, any indication that he could talk his way out of the situation. But Emma's face was unreadable, a mask of cold composure. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft but unyielding, slicing through the air with an undeniable authority. "I think it's time for the truth, Jake." Her words were quiet, almost gentle, but they carried a weight that made everyone in the room turn toward her. The room fell into a tense silence. Jake's colleagues, his boss, even the woman standing awkwardly by the door. All eyes were on Emma now. She moved with a sense of purpose as she placed the folder on the dining table, the soft thud echoing in the quiet room. Without another word, she opened the folder and began laying out the evidence, piece by piece. The first items were screenshots of Jake's text, messages, each one a damning confession of his affairs. She placed them carefully in front of his boss, his colleagues craning their necks to see. Conversations with multiple women, flirtations, promises of future meetings. It was all there, in black and white, undeniable. Jake's face grew pale, his breathing shallow. He made a half-hearted attempt to move closer to the table, as if to swipe the evidence away, but Emma shot him a sharp look that rooted him in place. Her eyes, once full of warmth, were now steely, unrelenting. Next came the photos from the private investigator. Candid shots of Jake with his mistresses, at restaurants, leaving hotels, even at a park on what should have been a workday. Each photo was more damning than the last. A murmur of disbelief rippled through the room as Jake's colleagues realized the full extent of his betrayal, not just to Emma but to them as well. His boss's face had turned a deep shade of red, his jaw clenched in fury. Then came the emails, proof that Jake had been embezzling company funds to finance his secret liaisons. This revelation hit harder than anything else. His career, his carefully constructed professional image, was crumbling before his eyes. The room was heavy with shock and disgust as Emma continued to methodically present her case. She stood tall, her hands steady as she laid each piece of evidence down, like a prosecutor making her final arguments. There was no need for raised voices or emotional outbursts. The truth, cold and irrefutable, was enough to destroy him. Jake tried to speak, his voice barely above a whisper. "Emma, this isn't..." But Emma cut him off with a raised hand. She didn't need his excuses. The evidence spoke for itself. "You didn't just cheat on me, Jake," Emma said, her voice trembling with the weight of her controlled fury. "You cheated yourself out of everything." Her words hung in the air, sharp and unforgiving. For months, Jake had believed he was untouchable, that his double life would never catch up to him. But now, with his colleagues staring at him in disgust, his boss glaring at him with barely contained rage, and his reputation in tatters, the magnitude of his actions finally hit him. He wasn't just losing his marriage. He was losing everything. Jake stammered weak denials, grasping for words that might save him. "It's not what it looks like," he said, his voice shaking. "I can explain." But no one was listening anymore. The look of betrayal on his colleagues' faces said it all. His boss rose slowly from his seat, his face a mask of fury. "Jake," he said, his voice low and dangerous, "I think you've said enough." The room erupted into hushed whispers of disbelief and disgust. His once loyal friends and co-workers were now turning against him, their eyes filled with judgment. The damage was done. His carefully curated life, his career, his reputation, it was all crumbling before him, piece by piece, just as Emma had intended. And as for Emma, she stood in the middle of the room, tall and unflinching, her eyes locked on Jake. She had waited months for this moment, and now, watching him squirm under the weight of his lies, she felt a quiet sense of satisfaction. This was her justice, her revenge, not just for his infidelity, but for the years she had wasted believing in a marriage built on deception. As Jake slumped back in his chair, defeated, Emma turned and calmly walked out of the room, leaving him to face the consequences of his actions. Chapter 5. The Final Blow. The aftermath of that fateful dinner party unfolded with brutal efficiency. The scandal erupted within Jake's professional circle, and the fallout was swift and unforgiving. Within days, Jake was summoned to a meeting with his bosses, their expressions grim and unforgiving. The evidence Emma had provided, the embezzlement, the affairs, the sheer brazenness of his deceit, left them with no choice. He was terminated immediately, his once promising career reduced to ashes. Jake tried to salvage what little remained of his reputation, but it was no use. His colleagues wanted nothing to do with him, their loyalty to him shattered by the revelation of his betrayals. His phone, once buzzing with texts and calls from friends and business partners, now sat silent on the kitchen counter. His friends distanced themselves, some avoiding him entirely, others offering shallow words of sympathy that felt more like pity. Jake was left with nothing. His carefully constructed life had disintegrated, piece by piece. No job, no social standing, and soon, no home. Emma, however, had anticipated it all. She had known how quickly the tides would turn once the truth was exposed, and she had prepared for it. Over the following days, as Jake's world collapsed, Emma remained a pillar of calm strength. She had already filed for divorce, her lawyer handling the proceedings with precision. She made sure Jake's financial support was cut off at the roots, leaving him scrambling for alternatives. He had no leverage left. The house, of course, was hers. The life they had built together was now hers alone, cleansed of his deceit. When the day finally came for Jake to leave, the weight of his losses was palpable. His suitcases sat packed in the hallway, a stark reminder of everything he had lost. It was a gray afternoon, the sky thick with clouds that seemed to mirror Jake's own hopelessness. He stood by the front door, glancing back at the house for what he knew would be the last time. His once confident demeanor was gone, replaced by a hollow resignation. Emma stood in the doorway, watching him. She wore a serene expression, her arms crossed loosely over her chest. There was no anger in her eyes anymore, just a calm, detached satisfaction. She had one, and they both knew it. Jake cleared his throat, fumbling for words, but none came. What could he possibly say? There were no apologies or explanations that could undo what had been done. Instead, he simply picked up his bags and headed to the car, his movements sluggish, weighed down by the enormity of his failure. Emma didn't move, didn't flinch. She stood there as he opened the car door, slid into the driver's seat, and started the engine. The sound of the car pulling out of the driveway echoed in the stillness of the afternoon. As Jake's car disappeared down the street, Emma felt a sense of finality wash over her. She had orchestrated everything, from the moment she found out about his affairs to the night of his public humiliation. Every step had been calculated, precise. Jake had underestimated her, and now he was paying the price. A slow smile spread across her face, the kind of smile that came with the deep satisfaction of a long game well played. She had taken everything from him, his job, his reputation, his circle of influence, and he had never even seen it coming. Emma turned and stepped back inside the house, closing the door gently behind her. The silence of the empty house no longer felt lonely. It felt peaceful. It was hers now, her space, her life, her future. There was no lingering sadness, no regret for what had transpired. Emma had been patient, methodical. She had waited for the right moment to strike, and when she did, she made sure Jake lost everything, just as he had taken everything from her. In the months ahead, Emma would rebuild her life, but this time on her own terms. She had no illusions about love or marriage anymore. She didn't need either to feel whole. The strength she had found within herself, the power she had wielded so carefully, was more than enough. Emma was free, and she would never let anyone take that from her again. As she walked through the now quiet house, the sound of her footsteps echoing against the walls, she felt an overwhelming sense of victory. Jake was gone, and with him, every trace of the life that had once kept her trapped in his lies. She was free. Finally, truly free. Epilogue. The aftermath. In the weeks that followed Jake's departure, the house felt emptier, but to Emma, it was a different kind of emptiness, a quiet, welcome one. The absence of tension, of deceit, of Jake's presence felt like a liberation. The silence that once would have unsettled her now became a soothing soundtrack to her newfound peace. Mornings were her favorite. She would wake up, make herself a cup of coffee, and sit by the large bay window, watching the sun creep over the skyline. The view had always been there, but it seemed clearer now, more vibrant, like she could finally appreciate the world without the fog of Jake's lies clouding her perspective. She relished these moments, sipping her coffee as she let the stillness of the early hours wash over her. Emma's revenge had been meticulous, calculated, and executed with precision, but what she hadn't fully anticipated was how much it would change her. When she first uncovered Jake's infidelity, her pain had been sharp, overwhelming, a force that threatened to swallow her whole. But now, looking back, she realized it had also been the catalyst for something greater. Jake's betrayal, while devastating, had ultimately given her the opportunity to take control of her life in a way she never had before. Her friends rallied around her in the aftermath. They'd always admired her strength, but now there was a new level of respect in their eyes. Emma had done what many couldn't. She had faced her pain head-on and transformed it into power. Her circle of friends expanded, too. People were drawn to her newfound confidence, her sense of independence that radiated from within. She no longer needed validation from anyone, least of all from a man who had betrayed her. With Jake out of her life, Emma started focusing on herself in ways she hadn't in years. She took up new hobbies, photography, hiking, even pottery. She traveled, visiting the places she and Jake had always talked about but never visited. The trips were just for her now, and she loved the freedom of exploring the world on her own terms, without having to cater to anyone else's desires. She also threw herself into work, surprising even herself with how much she accomplished. Her career flourished. Without Jake's constant distractions, she was more focused than ever, climbing the ranks faster than she had imagined. The professional world saw her as a force to be reckoned with, sharp, determined, and entirely in control. Jake, on the other hand, faded into the background of her life like a distant memory. She heard through mutual acquaintances that he was struggling, but she didn't care enough to ask for details. His downfall had been swift, just as she had planned. The shame of the public humiliation, the loss of his job, the distance from friends, it all weighed on him, and it was exactly what he deserved. He had tried to reach out once, sending a short, regretful text, but Emma deleted it without responding. He no longer had a place in her life, and she had no interest in reopening old wounds. One morning, sitting at the same bay window, Emma looked out over the city, the sun warm on her face. She reflected on the journey she had taken, from the moment she discovered Jake's betrayal to this present, peaceful state. Her heart was no longer burdened by the hurt he had caused. She had been patient, calculated, and methodical, and in the end, her perfect plan had worked flawlessly. She had taken control of her destiny, and with that, she had won. And in that quiet moment, Emma knew she had emerged victorious, not just because she had taken Jake down, but because she had rebuilt herself in the process. Stronger, wiser, and completely in charge of her own happiness. The pain Jake had caused was real, but it no longer defined her. Instead, it had been the fuel for her transformation. And now, standing on the other side of it all, Emma was at peace with everything that had happened. The chapter of her life with Jake had ended, and in its place, a new chapter had begun. One where she was free, empowered, and completely in control of her own fate. She smiled to herself as she finished her coffee, the city alive beneath her. Emma had finally found what she had been searching for all along, herself, and that, more than any revenge she had enacted, was the true victory.